Welcome to Understanding Burnout, what science can tell us and how we can sustainably recover. The Center for Professional Education at UT Austin is your host for today's webinar. We offer non-academic credit programs to help individuals meet their professional and personal goals while assisting organizations and employee and team development and performance. Our speaker today is Tanya Tarr, founder of Cultivated Insights, a corporate learning and development company. She is also a senior contributor to Forbes, where she writes about leadership and burnout. Trained as a behavioral scientist, Tanya worked for 17 years in political and legislative campaigns across the United States. She brings her perspective on how to support robust burnout recovery through her lens as a scientist, journalist, leadership strategist, and woman of color. Everyone, please welcome Tanya Tarr.
Hi, y'all. And I just love the University of Texas at Austin, particularly the Center for Professional Education. But we're also going to take a moment here and build a virtual campfire together. And what I need us all to do is we're going to take a breath together. We'll do 3 of them. And then Brett's going to have a poll so we can take a pulse of everybody in the room. And there are currently 240 people on this call, which is astounding. And I'm so excited. Oh, 241. All right, so here we go. I'm going to count it out, but we're just going to take 3 breaths together. Okay, so everyone sit with your feet planted on the ground and with your back as straight as possible, not leaning against your chair. And we're just going to take 3 breaths together, and I will count this out. So big inhale, 1, 2, 3. Big exhale, 1, 2, 3. Big inhale, 1, 2, 3. Big exhale, 1, 2, 3. Last time. Big inhale, 1, 2, 3. Big exhale, 1, 2, 3. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being in that moment with me and with us all together in community. Okay, so the first question I want to ask is, how are we doing today? How are we doing today? 1 is terrible, 10 is amazing. Brett's going to launch a poll. And let me know how you're showing up to this call.
We've got good responses. Looks like a lot of people are at a 7. That's our highest rate. Good. Some at a 2.
So by the way, as we're given a few more minutes here, taking a breath together and then also doing this pulse check is something that I learned from an executive at Cisco. And the pulse check, I think, is particularly helpful because you don't have to give a whole lot of information, but everyone else in the meeting has a sense of where you're at. So we've got a lot of folks that are neutral to having a good day, some folks that aren't. And I just want to say, if you put a 4, a 3, or a 2, I see you, and I'm very glad that you are here. I'm very glad we're all here, right? But this helps when you're working virtually to kind of take a little bit of a scan. Okay, so Brett mentioned a little bit about my background, and I'm really focused on, as a behavioral scientist, I'm really trying to understand how people's values drive their choices and their behaviors, right? And that's what I looked at when I worked in politics for so long, trying to figure out, why people get involved and vote. And in the last few years, in the last 6 years, I've been writing for Forbes and working with corporate clients. So it's been very interesting seeing the difference between those populations. And these are some of the folks I've worked for. But I want to start us off by telling a story about how I helped stabilize burnout for 65,000 people. And back then we called it, my boss, the state federation president, called it the doom loop. So we helped our members exit the doom loop. So in 2009, I moved to Texas to be the political director for one of the largest teachers associations here in Texas, the Texas American Federation of Teachers. And boy, did I get an education. I got to help school educators, whether they were classroom teachers, bus drivers, janitors, facilities managers, and everybody in between, teaching assistants, helping them stand up for themselves, and also to help the school kids of Texas, which is what we found motivated everybody. And I really did get an education. My job primarily was to help people and all of our different locals, almost 30 locals across this great state, participate in nonpartisan school board elections and also legislative advocacy, because here in Texas, school finance is controlled by the Texas legislature. But the issue was that nobody was showing up, right? Nobody was showing up because they were exhausted. And they were getting beat up left, right, and center by the media, by the principals, by people in their community, by angry parents. And nobody was showing up because educators were burned out. They just didn't have it in them. They didn't have extra capacity. And so we had to figure out how to solve this problem. We had to figure out, how we could get them to be engaged, and why they love what they did, what they didn't love, what were their points of pain, right? What were their points of exhaustion? Just to listen to them and to find out too, what made it so rewarding to do the very difficult work that they did every day, but important work that they did. And so what we found was, from all those conversations, real conversations, we found that people did actually start coming out and volunteering, and we started knocking out some school board elections and electing people that would stand up for the school kids of Texas and also respect educators, all educators. And so you might be thinking, well, gee, Tanya, that's a really great story, but I thought you were a scientist. Could you measure any of this, right? You're telling us this great story, but did you measure any of this impact? And so what I will say is, yeah, we did measure this impact. And what I look to is voting participation. Because if you've got a group of people who are disengaged, they're not going to show up. And in fact, when I got here, right as I got here, we had midterm elections, and 33% of folks were voting, whether they were just your average registered Texan or a non-union educator or a union member. Didn't matter. Only 33% would show up in a midterm election. So we spent that next 4 years talking to our membership and talking to other educators who weren't our members, but just talking to folks that were engaged. And what we found from having those meaningful conversations and for helping people feel like they were seen and heard, that in 2014, 4 years later, 33% still of the average Texan voter voted, but 61% of non-union educators voted and 68% of our members voted, right? So this is more than double over 4 years. And so I look to this and I think, okay, we had a real impact that translated into real behavior. So the key questions we kept asking ourselves and our members was, who are we helping? What are we proud of? And why do we keep showing up for our kids? And how do we keep showing up for our kids? And those are the types of questions that help people remember that they had a sense of autonomy, that they had community, that they were being recognized. And these are all aspects we're going to talk more about during this lecture. And Brett, thank you for reminding me. So speaking of which, since this is a talk about occupational burnout, we want to know more about where y'all are coming from and what industries y'all are coming from. So if you could launch that poll real quick, that'd be great. And so as we're taking that poll, I'm also going to kind of go over the quick agenda here. So we're going to talk about 3 big things today. We're going to talk about the data on burnout, including anyone that took the quiz that we shared earlier. And then we're going to talk about, so let me step back here for a second. So I'm going to show the data and tell you kind of what we look like in the US and sort of globally. But typically when I do this talk, I go very in depth about the quiz and I do all this stuff. And yesterday I was looking at the slides and I was like, you know what? I think most folks that are coming to this call are probably burnt out or know someone who is burnt out. And so I switched up the order of this lecture, and I'm actually going to talk about 3 clusters of burnout triage tactics to help stabilization first. So we're going to talk about the solutions first, and then we're going to talk more about the academic research and what's out there.
We have 34% government or government agency, 8% business or business management, 9% healthcare, 4% in communications, 3% in information technology, 4% in education K through 12, 18% in higher education or research, and 18% in other.
Wonderful. And I'm seeing folks drop stuff in the chat too. Thank you for doing that. And thank you for letting us know where you're coming from. And huge thank you to everybody who's working in public education and healthcare, and particularly first responders. Everyone's work is valuable, but I think y'all are definitely, just like when I got here first to Texas, folks are getting kind of beat up by this pandemic. So thank you all for the important work that everyone does. So the learning objectives for today are: we want to spot key indicators of burnout, understand stabilization techniques and tactics, and then take a second look on how burnout is defined specifically by Dr. Christina Maslach. She is the one that innovated on this research originally 40 years ago. And I feel like her research is a really great blueprint and roadmap for what we all need to do, and particularly what our leaders need to do in organizations to do our best to stabilize and potentially inoculate as best we can against occupational burnout. So also, we want to recognize that understanding occupational and pandemic burnout is a very integrative topic, right? So you're at that middle of that Venn diagram here, right? In this crazy pandemic life we're all living, right? We've got our work life, and a lot of us are trying to figure out hybrid work, remote situations. And we are constantly battling our ability to focus because we're trying to manage all these different things going on. Not only is there COVID-19 and all the pandemic stuff going on, but there's also overlapping global crises. We've got climate disasters, racial injustice, increasing threats of violence. And that's always in the background. That is always in the background. And then we've got our home life, right? We're trying to do our best. In some cases, we did, or we still might be doing homeschooling, and we might also be caring for our elderly, family members and community members. And we're constantly worrying about our loved ones and their safety. I think a lot about a lot of the research too around folks that are Gen X or on the older end of millennial, where we might have children, dependent children, but also elderly parents, and taking care of them at the same time of managing, work, and then also managing all these other stressors is a lot. It's a lot. Let's just take a moment to recognize that, right? Overlapping spheres of influence. So let's also think about what the burnout data looks like. So we sent out a quiz, and if you didn't get a chance to take it, that's fine. And I bet Jan will send it out in the follow-up notes. But it's a quiz that I designed to help people get a sense of where they would land on this busy to burnout index. And so we had about 87 people take it when I pulled the data to create this image, and 49% of us are burnt out. Okay, let's just throw chronically stressed folks in there and say 50%. So half of us are showing up and we are burnt out, and it's a serious thing. And the other half of us are somewhere between busy, fatigued, and stressed. And that's an important thing to note. That's actually a lot. There's a lot of red on that slide. There's a lot of red on this slide too. So here's some of the other organizations that I've worked with where we've run that same quiz and figured out kind of where people shake out. And so what's interesting to me is the UT results are very similar to general public. So there's a quiz I have that's open to the general public, but also I teach classes, and so my students took it as well. And so I thought it was interesting that those are about the same. We have an early stage tech startup, and more than half of their staff is burnt out, which is kind of par for the course, I think, in some ways for tech startups. And then the last three bars here, we have a high-tech women's employee resource group, a software company, and data science company. And folks are doing a little bit better. The high-tech women's employee resource group surprised me a little bit because there's way more green on that bar than red. So I think there are places and pockets where people are managing to find a way to stay on the busy side of things and potentially fatigue side of things rather than the burnout side. But this is globally a problem that we are all contending with. We are in the third year now of this pandemic, right? And that bar is the United States. And, this report from McKinsey in 2021, April of 2021, they found that 56% of Americans feel somewhat to a very high degree of burnout. Sometimes I wonder if burnout is a particularly American thing, but it does show up in other places. And also burnout culturally looks quite different. So in Asia, there's not as much evidence of people self-reporting burnout, but Asia also, and I say this as someone who's half Asian, they don't talk about mental health the same way that we do. And I think that people think about burnout as a mental health thing, which it is, but I think also we have to expand even that notion of it, because in my own personal journey, because I did have my own occupational burnout journey, I got very sick. So for me, burnout manifested in a very physical way, and then I was able to rehabilitate over time. But Yeah, I think we're a little bit better about talking about it here in the States. I think it shows up differently in other countries. And this is a poll results from June 2021 from Business Insider. I covered this for an article in my column. And the thing about this is, if we look at this in green, we've got men responding how burnt out they are. And in orange, we've got women responding how burnt out they are. And there is way more orange on the screen than green, although on the extremely burnt out and men and women responded about the same. And so this isn't entirely surprising that women might be responding to be more burnt out than men. I took this poll to Dr. Mandy O'Neill, and she is at George Mason University. She runs a wellness institute there, and she is an expert on workplace wellness. And I said to her, what do you think of these poll results? And what she said was so interesting to me. She said, well, you know, on its face, it's probably true. Women are taking up more of the slack during this pandemic. So are they more burnt out? Absolutely. But also what's important, and I think this is important for all of the men on this call, anyone that identifies as a man and people that are connected to men in their lives, that what she said was, she thinks men tend to underreport how burned out they feel. And that's because they don't have the same type of tools that women are often socialized to have around expressing emotions, and particularly things like feeling burned out. So she thinks that actually men are underreporting how burned out they are, and that also there's a social pressure to not admit this kind of stuff. So I always think that's really interesting. And it's an article on my column. So if you want to take a look, great article, really good suggestions on how to manage through. So again, burnout happens because of overwhelm and a loss of self-agency at a very high level. That's hopefully something I hope you remember. And like I said, Usually I take a very linear approach to this. I'm like, y'all took the quiz. Now we're going to debrief the quiz. Now I'm going to tell you about something else. And, you know, I was going through these slides yesterday and I was like, forget it. Let's start with the solutions first. So let's talk about 3 clusters of burnout triage tactics. And I suggest these because they have the ability to help promote stabilization. I'm not going to say recovery. We are not recovered. We are still, this pandemic is still in progress. So the first tactic here is we want to close the stress cycle. Emily Nagoski wrote a great book about burnout recovery, and she and her sister talk a lot about the stress cycle and closing the stress cycle. So the original stress cycle looks like this. Original stress cycle is you're walking through the forest, minding your own business, and then a bear jumps out, and that's the stressor, right? There's violence on the horizon. Something's about to eat you. And so we have this physiological response, okay? So, we have this physiological response to the bear, right? We're like, holy cow, there's a bear, it's going to eat us. And so there's adrenaline going on, there's cortisol being produced, your body is readying itself to take off, to run, possibly to play dead, maybe to fight, but probably to run, right? That's what's going on though. Physically, your body is readying itself to run. It's internalizing as fear or anger or any of those things that you are processing as you see a real physical threat in front of you, right? And so then you take action. And that is the adaptive coping strategy. And by the way, this stress cycle is based off of the Holmes-Ray stress inventory. But there's a stressor, there's a physiological response, there's internalization, and then you take action. Hopefully you run away and not get eaten, right? There's also an incomplete stress cycle. So if you're here in Austin with me and Brett, maybe you're on MOPAC at the wrong time of day, right? It gets very crowded. You're at a complete standstill. You're late to pick up somebody or to do something. And you have what is an incomplete stress cycle. The stressor is traffic and being stuck there. Physiological response, same to being chased by a bear. Okay, all sorts of adrenaline being produced, cortisol, all these other things. Your body's throwing a bunch of blood down into your calves to get you ready to run, but you're stuck in your car. You're stuck behind a steering wheel. You can't do anything. You're internalizing that, right? So the physiological response translates into anger or into road rage, but you can't take action. Maladaptive coping strategy in the situation is maybe to yell at the other driver or lean on your horn or ride somebody's bumper or something like that, right? But you can't actually discharge all of this energy that has now been ginned up in your body to help defend yourself, right? It's incomplete. So one thing that is very useful in stabilizing, right, against burnout, if you're feeling burnt out and you're feeling chronically stressed, is you definitely need to consider, if you are able-bodied, not everybody can do this, but if you're able-bodied, physical exercise and movement closes the stress cycle. It does not have to be a crazy workout. It could be something as simple as doing a couple of push-ups or dancing in your kitchen or just moving around and taking a walk around the block, that can help close the stress cycle, right? It can discharge all of that energy that's being ginned up to help you fight or take off. The other thing is allow yourself space and privacy to express emotions like crying. Crying is another great thing that creates all this nice brain chemistry that helps sort of down cycle that physiological response that you feel when you are stressed. And crying is a release, right? The other thing is if you're angry, write an anger letter on paper and pen and then destroy it. This is a technique I learned from an incredibly gifted cognitive behavioral therapist that I went to for decades. And you need to make sure though, that when you write the anger letter, I prefer pen and paper because I'm old school, but if you write it, make sure you destroy it. Okay. Do not send it to the person that you intend. I also found out recently that Abraham Lincoln used to also write anger letters and destroy it. Had no idea. It was effective for him too, evidently. And some of the groups that I've given this lecture to work in customer service. So I've been told that there have been many emails that have also been written as an anger email. But then again, don't put the email, don't put the email address in the to field, just delete it. But expressing the anger helps close that stress cycle. Okay, that is a very positive adaptive coping strategy. And then laughter is really good medicine too, y'all. Seriously, like you might have to put a timer on yourself so you don't get completely sucked into TikTok, but watching people do silly things or watching, animal videos can actually be very good for you if you're laughing, especially deep laughter. That again creates diaphragmatic breathing, just like the deep breathing we did at the beginning of this lecture. And that shuts the cortisol off. It puts oxygen into our nasal cavities here. There are neurotransmitters in here. We take those deep breaths. It tells our body we're safe. So we shift down from that alert that we might have gotten into because of a stressor. Okay, let's also talk about this concept I've been thinking about. I think of it as active rest with coworkers. So does anybody do any sort of physical training? If you do, please put it in the chat. I practice martial arts and I also I do boxing, American boxing. And so so if you do any physical training, Orange Theory, yes, Sarah. Camp Gladiator, exactly, Janet. You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Walking a dog, absolutely. Rock climbing, rowing, yoga, I love it. So when you're training, right, there are times when you're actively doing something, right? So if I'm working on a heavy bag and we got a 3-minute round, I'm hitting the heavy bag and then you get a 1-minute rest. Oh, I love all these answers. Curling, amazing. Playing music, Pilates, jump rope, exactly. So like when you're in the moment of training, you're very serious about it. So I'm hitting the heavy bag for 3 minutes, right? And then you have 1 minute for rest. But sometimes your coach is going to say, all right, do some body weight squats or do some push-ups or whatever between rounds. So you're not working 100%, but you're still moving a little bit, right? That's this concept of active rest. And I think this is really important for us to kind of connect with our coworkers. And I'm going to take a little bit of a detour here for a second. So because there's a design to active rest that's important here. So there are a bunch of researchers in Sweden, and they were trying to figure out singing and its impact on stress reduction. And so what they did was they hooked up a high school choir like this up to heart monitors. And what they found was within seconds of people singing together, the heart started beating in unison, in synchronous action, which to me, I find so amazing. So if y'all are part of choir or anything like that, just know when you're singing with other people off literally the same sheet of music, your body responds in a way that is just magical. Everybody's hearts beat in unison, which I think is so cool. This is also very similar to a concept of mirror neurons. So we are little engines of mimicry. That's how we learn. When we do things in synchronous action with others, our brains create these neural pathways. And scientists think that those pathways are where these feelings of empathy, trust, and safety travel, which I just find so amazing. Right. And so when you create those synchronous shared real-time experiences with others, not asynchronous, real-time shared clock time together, and you're doing the same activity together, that's where these mirror neurons are built, and it boosts cooperation and collaborative problem solving. In fact, there's even a study from Stanford that I always chuckle at, because when you have people do things, chant together, complete a puzzle together, walk together, do a wave in a stadium, you're creating those mirror neurons, and it helps us better cooperate with other people. And you don't even have to like them, but it helps create that sense of belonging and community. So I put together a couple of ideas, because here's the other thing too. Burnout happens over a long period of time. The recovery period also happens over a long period of time. And so I think people sometimes they think, oh, burnout, I got to like quit my job and go take a sabbatical and whatever. And in fact, not only does the literature suggest this, but my own personal experience, and I am now almost 8 years in remission from my health issues that happened because of burnout, that actually what I found was consistently taking small breaks was more effective than trying to take a sabbatical or take a long time away. Like extended PTO is not going to solve a burnout problem, right? Because burnout in part is habitual, happened because of bad habits. So, and particularly now where sometimes everybody on this call who is working in government or in education or healthcare, like we can't all check out, right? So taking 10 to 15 minutes or 15 to 20 minutes and doing active rest with coworkers is actually a very good mitigation strategy. And so here are a couple: group crossword or word search game, group logic game, non-work related talks, like do a 3-minute chat about a hobby or an interest. The key thing is it has to be synchronous in a shared activity or experience. So I actually test drove a bunch of these free games with some friends. We found that Scattergories was the most fun, according to the group, where basically, it flashes up a letter and then you get 2 minutes and it has a bunch of categories and everybody has to write down answers, to the categories with that letter. And you can, if you Scattergories free game, if you Google that, it'll give you something that you can play online with your colleagues. And it was really helpful. And it didn't take, we did 3 rounds, took about 15 minutes. So the cool thing about this is when you do this, when you intentionally create moments of active rest with folks, it's going to help do a little stress relief. It's going to help cognitively keep your brain going. And then it's also going to translate into better collaboration with your colleagues in real work tasks. But again, real short stuff, you know what I mean? The last one in terms of these clusters of tactics is intentional pace setting and to help reduce overwhelm. Because again, overwhelm is such a key part of burnout. Good pacing might look like make an end of day checkout list. So a lot of us, I'm sure, write to-do lists at the beginning of the day. But one thing I found, I do this myself, a lot of my clients and folks that I work with do this as well. And it's been very effective for all of us, is that at the end of the day, you look at your to-do list and you start making a list of things that have to be done tomorrow. And that's your checkout list. And that also, for a lot of us, is a habit that we do to help close down the rest of the day. So by actually making the list, we are creating a boundary, a cognitive boundary to the day. So that helps a lot of folks, if they're working from home, close the book on the day and be ready for the next day and just stop thinking about whatever it is that we're dealing with. The other thing I've been calling this, create a Mr. Rogers effect to open and close virtual meetings if they're longer, if they're about an hour or longer, and always follow the same routine. So for every lecture I ever give, I made all of y'all, thank you for joining me in that deep breath exercise. 3 breaths takes less than 2 minutes. I've made a bunch of very fancy pharmaceutical executives do it too. And whoever it is that I'm lecturing to, we start the meeting the same way. We have the 3 breaths, then we do the pulse check. And usually too, I ask people to tell me something they did last week they're really proud of. And so that activates self-affirmation. And all these other good things I don't have time to talk about. Thank you, Brett, for the time warning. I'm going to keep moving through these slides here. Managers. So if any of you manage people on this call, the one-on-one check-ins are so key. Again, a very great very useful mitigation strategy is meaningful conversations, really showing up to listen to someone, and asking them too about what's going right. What is going right? There's plenty of bad stuff going on in the world. There's plenty of ways to really, have negative confirmation bias going on. Just look at the news. But if you are a manager and asking, your direct reports, or if your coworker asking your other colleagues, what's going right? Tell me what's going right. That actually helps us, again, sort of build the equanimity that we need to move through this difficult time. And the other thing for managers is, as a key managing tactic, is to ask your direct reports about their hobbies or their leisure time, not to be invasive, like be very respectful about asking them. But if your direct report tells you about their hobbies, and, oh yeah, I did that, and I competed in that thing, or I did some more woodworking this weekend, that's a good signal of health, that your direct reports are staying below that stressed level. They might be fatigued, or they might be busy. If they tell you that they are not having time for their hobbies, that could be potentially an early warning sign. The other thing is managers in particular, but with your colleagues and coworkers too, give public praise for good work, but particularly managers, directors, executives, C-suite, pay attention to what your employees are doing and give meaningful public praise. That is a huge way to mitigate and inoculate against burnout. We're going to talk more about that here in a second. Okay, so those are the 3 clusters of mitigation strategies. I hope some of that has been helpful for folks. I hope you all test drive it. And please let me know if it works, if it's helpful. And also too, if free online games, always on the lookout for like good stuff, because it's such a fine line. You know what I mean, Brett? Like sometimes it's like great and sometimes it's cheesy, but like you got to find that fine line. And the other funny thing is, what were you going to say? It looks like you unmuted yourself.
Oh, not a thing. I just clicked on the mic. So.
Okay, very good. It's a funny thing with the active rest piece of it, because, simple games are actually quite useful, I think. And it's the trash talking that sometimes happens as a result, right, of playing categories or whatever. Like that's where the real bonding happens. But it's also a way to just connect with people and do a little bit of stress mitigation. So, all right, so let's talk about the Busy to Burnout Index. And so that was the quiz that we gave, and those were the results I showed at the beginning. And so I looked at general emotional state, time spent with loved ones, sleep quality, workload management, fitness, leisure opportunities, and hobbies, and some suggestions for recovery. But those key points at the top are based off of a collection of indexes that I researched before I wrote up that quiz. A lot of it had to do with Dr. Maslach's research, which again, we're going to go a little bit into here in a moment. But this used to be a lot of slides, and I boiled it down to one, y'all, because I wanted like one nice slide. So here, this is the key difference. On the left side, we're going to talk about indicators for busy, fatigued, or stressed. On the right side of the slide are indicators of red flags of chronically stressed or in burnout. And I want to make the distinction here very, very clear, right? If you are busy, fatigued, or stressed right now, you are tired, but you can generally bounce back within 2 weeks in terms of like sleep, for example. You have some time in your personal life. Deadlines are clear and manageable. Though if you have a high workload, which sometimes happens, it's temporary and the work is resourced. So you have the time, the tools, resources to actually execute on the work. Things can get busy and stressful, but there's an end date to it, right? It's not forever or without end. So now let's talk about chronically stressed or in burnout. The exhaustion is chronic. Okay, it's chronic. You've been waking up tired for the last month, the last 2 months, the last 18 months, however long, right? But it's chronic, right? You are actively avoiding loved ones or social connections and self-isolating. I know a lot of us are isolating in general because of the pandemic, but self-isolation these days could look like I'm not going on social media and interacting with my friends like I usually do. Okay. You are actively avoiding leisure activities or hobbies. So this is a condition called anhedonia. It's also a characteristic of depression. And it could be localized depression, but if you're actively avoiding things that bring you happiness or pleasure or are restorative, self-care included, that can be a sign that you are in burnout, okay? And then you have extremely negative emotions, rage or numbness. I'm not a touchy-feely person, but I'm going to talk about emotions here for a second. There is a difference between being angry and it being directed versus rage, okay? Anger, there's still agency involved. You can take action or you're using it to fuel your motivation to get something done. Rage is just response to violence. It is a response that cannot be channeled. And you feel out of control, whereas anger, particularly self-righteous anger, I'm going to be honest. Anger helps me get a lot of stuff done, y'all, but it's strategic. You can use it to motivate the work, but rage is something else. It's not strategic. It's just unbridled anger of a different sort of emotion and reaction to threat and violence usually, and or numbness. So it's either rage or numbness. You just do not care. You have checked out. Those type of emotions are signals of burnout. Completely unmanageable, unresourced workload. Right. So these are the ways to separate out. And am I just busy or fatigued or even stressed, or am I actually in burnout? Well-managed stress can actually be pretty great if we can stay inside of that zone where we have comfort and there's stretch or maybe a little bit of strain for a short period of time. But and in that wonderful zone, so there's actually 2 types of stress. There's eustress and distress. Eustress is great. It is the thing that motivates us, that creates adrenaline that helps us, win a race or put together a presentation or perform on a stage and sing or win a bicycle race or whatever it is that you're doing. It's great for performance. Eustress is great for performance, right? The issue is, though, that we're in a space now where it's more distress, and stress cannot be sustained on the long term. So this is the general adaptation syndrome. This is how most mammals respond to stress. And at the beginning, we actually had the alarm, and our resistance to stress might be low because we're caught unawares. But then in the next period, so maybe for some of 2021, right, we had the ability to manage the stress to some degree, but now we're here in the exhaustion phase, right? We are in the exhaustion phase. And so let's talk about what exhaustion looks like, right? So this is it. Now we're getting to the science piece of it. Okay, what is the science of occupational burnout? So Dr. Christina Maslach, 40 years ago, 1981, she was researching healthcare workers and found that, and she was actually the one, she was interviewing, I think, a nurse, if I remember correctly. And the nurse was just like, I just don't care anymore. I'm just burnt out. I don't care anymore. And that is how Dr. Maslach found that phrase and found this condition that people resonate with. They have a sense almost intuitively of understanding what this is. But burnout is a state of emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion created by unmanaged chronic stress. So it might feel like emotional exhaustion, cynicism, or ineffectiveness. So emotional exhaustion is compassion fatigue, right? Cynicism, depersonalization, and disconnection. I can't connect with my colleagues anymore, or the mission of my organization. And ineffectiveness, low personal sense of accomplishment. What does that mean? It doesn't matter what I do, nothing's going to change. That's what ineffectiveness feels like, right? Okay, so occupational burnout is experienced by individuals, but often caused by organizations. This is something that Dr. Maslach has shown us very clearly in the literature. It's important to remember, though, that organizations are made up of individuals, right? So whether I'm seeing it on social media or if people react to an article I wrote, or sometimes I hear this from my clients, you've got employees saying, well, what is the organization going to do about burnout? I can understand why people might want to place blame, because you're trying to look for a reason why all this stuff is happening, right? But the reality is that solving burnout, you can't beat burnout. It's not actually, you don't beat it, you dissolve it, you evolve away from it. And it is not a competitive situation. Who's to blame for this is a competitive situation. It's actually a collaborative situation, which is, how do we make adjustments? How do we make small adjustments? How do we make consistent small adjustments? How do we evolve the way that we work, right? And remember that external stressors compound burnout for everyone, right? So it really is a situation where we need as many different eyes looking at the problem, as many different potential solutions we can iterate together. That actually helps us more than trying to place blame at this moment, because we are very much in this triage and stabilization period. So Dr. Maslach found that there's 6 points of fit. She found that everyone talks about workload. Everybody knows about workload when it comes to burnout, right? That's how popular media is casting burnout. But actually, there are 5 other elements that are involved: autonomy, positive feedback, community, fairness, and values. So let's go through them. So workload management is easy. Is the work resourced? Is it reasonable? Burnout happens when you don't have enough stuff to complete the work. Here's something else, though. Autonomy and control is really important. Can I make choices on how I do the work? Can I be creative in solving problems? This is a big deal, because when you can change, remix, or change up the way that you do your work, that gives you a sense of agency, but it also puts you in your creative mind, and that's really important. If you're looking for a concrete example of this, Google job crafting, YouTube, and there are a bunch of great videos about this and research on how when people have a choice of how they execute on their work, it actually also helps prevent burnout. Reward and positive feedback. Mentioned this a little bit earlier. Is my contribution at work recognized and publicly praised? Do I receive positive feedback from supervisors? Burnout happens when your work product is not publicly valued by your leaders. Anybody on this call, if you are a manager or a director or an executive or a CEO or whatever, if you're in a position of authority, pay attention to what your employees are doing and give meaningful public thanks and praise for what they're doing, because that makes them feel a sense of pride and a connection. And it costs observation time, staff time, and really caring about your employees. That is a huge thing to help mitigate burnout. Okay, seems kind of simple. I wish more people were doing it. All right, community. So, and I love this indicator. Do I feel like I belong? Is there a mutual sense of trust with my coworkers? Burnout happens when there's a lack of connection and trust among coworkers. But the other side of this is also true. When there is really strong community inside of an organization, it is incredibly helpful in stress mitigation and burnout mitigation. So all the work being done now, particularly around employee resource groups, super huge. That is great investment in mitigating against burnout. Fairness and ethics is really important too. Are the business processes of my organization fair and ethical? Is there transparency in how we operate? When people feel like they don't trust the fair management of their organization, this is where cynicism can develop, right? And cynicism is one of those key characteristics, according to Dr. Maslach's research. Values is the last one. It's very important. Do my values align with the organization's values? Do I have a sense of purpose with my work? Because burnout happens when there's misalignment, again, between an individual's core values and the values of the organization. So we got to make sure there's alignment there, right? So again, too, I want to mention that each of these points of fit indicates a solution. Dr. Maslach was looking at places where there was misalignment, but the reality is this is a great blueprint and roadmap for what you can make sure as a manager or as someone in a position of authority, or also just being a member of an organization that you know, okay, there are actually 5 other aspects to mitigating burnout issues. It's not just workload. Workload's important, but there are all these other things going on too. And if you think about that story I told you about the work that we did with public school educators here in the great state of Texas, that, you know, all of the work we did to talk to our members who were helping the school kids of Texas and getting them to talk about why they love their jobs, built a sense of community, helped them feel recognized, gave them a greater sense of autonomy because they were helping engage in school board elections. School boards have direct control over the wages and working conditions of every school employee. So we're helping them connect to that, give them a greater sense of autonomy. And then the last one was values, was activating their core values. We're constantly activating our common core values. There's a lot going on in the world right now. There is a lot going on. There are also a lot of people trying to sell you stuff. And some of that stuff's good, and some of that might be useful, and some of that might not be useful to you. But the one thing that takes time and friendship is truly starting, if you are feeling very burnt out, to find somebody that you trust and to have a conversation about what you're going through. Conversation has such private conversation, right? Secure private conversation has such positive impact on our emotional health. And is a really important way to take those first steps out. There's other adjustments that we need to do too, but really burnout, again, is the result of overwhelm, right? And a loss of self-agency, a loss of self-control. So the first step in recovery is to find somebody you trust and to talk it out a little bit, right? And then all those other things can happen too. Let's see, an example of appreciation publicly: email, newsletter, meeting announcements. Ariana, absolutely. I love all of those and being able for leaders to do all of those things. I think especially with newsletters, doing like an employee spotlight is really helpful. I know when I wrote newsletters and political campaigns that I had people reading my newsletter because I'd always write about a volunteer. They love those kind of stories and they love knowing more about their colleagues. Brett, what do we get?
Workload management, 8%, autonomy, 30%,
Oh,
positive feedback, 17%, community, 16%, fairness, 7%, and values, 23%.
I love that spread. That's nice. That's nice to know a lot of folks have autonomy available to them. That's important. That's important. Let's see. Do companies that have boss-led corporate structures have an overall increase of burnout versus those that have more of a hierarchical? Boss-led corporate structures feel hierarchical. So Erica, I think that's a good question. If you could maybe put some more clarification. Maybe she means if it's decentralized versus centralized. I think that's a really good question. I don't actually have a pat answer for you, but now I want to go and research it. That is a really interesting question. I think that, well, this isn't a direct answer, but I will tell you one company I'm really obsessed with, and I mean it, I'm such a nerd. There are a couple of companies I'm obsessed with that have really good corporate governance and really high employee engagement and retainment is the Gore Corporation. They've been studied an awful lot. They're the company that does mostly polymers, but they may manufacture Gore-Tex amongst a whole bunch of other products, but they have this really interesting strategy where they have a matrixed organization and they have lots of different facilities, but a facility that can never be more than 150 employees. And when you work for that company, you actually, you attach yourself to a project for a really long time. It's a very flat organization. And I just love the way that they move and do business together, and they have really high retention. But they take a very different approach to work. And I think this might be getting towards your question, Erica. The other example of really good corporate sort of culture and governance, I don't know how many people on the call are from Texas. I know my friends outside of Texas sometimes think I'm a little loopy when I say this, but I'm obsessed with HEB, which is a grocery store chain here in Texas. And I think they might be in Oklahoma too. I'm really obsessed with HEB. They do such a good job, and they are very hierarchical. But the thing as well about them that's so great is they've got very good values that are shared by their employees, and they really respect all of their workers. And it doesn't matter where in the organization you serve, that everyone is expected to do rotations throughout all the different stores. And even if you're in the executive offices, you know, at some point in your career at HEB, you're going to be bagging groceries. And that might be when you start at the organization, or it might be because the HEB is doing disaster response and they need to backfill some of the positions. So being able to interview a bunch of folks at HEB for a future book is one of my nerdy dreams, because I think they do it really well. How do we contact you with questions? Well, I'm going to put my email in the chat. You can always email me. And then if you just look for me I'm on LinkedIn. I'm at Nerdette on Twitter. And then just my name, Tanya Tarr, on Instagram, and I'm on LinkedIn. But yeah, I love questions. And some of your questions might end up on my column as an article. So let's see. And I've lost the thread, Brett. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I got one.
The celebration of HEB took up a lot of room.
Oh, yes. Good. I know. Aren't they great? They're so great. I love HEB so much. It's ridiculous. I mean, they just do everything right. Like, their ads feature employees. Every time I go there, I feel like I meet people who are so helpful and cheerful. They actually like working there. I'm just a huge fan of HEB. They just get so much right. I wish HEB would actually teach FEMA how to do disaster response. That's another lecture.
Okay, Olga has a question. She says you mentioned something, and I just wanted to follow up on it with a quick question.
Sure.
I just want to say it is not only about bad individual habits, but very much about systemic problems that create burnout and perpetuate burnout culture. How do you develop good habits in a broken system? That's an excellent question.
Fantastic question.
Especially when you are often shamed for displaying habits not aligned with overworking.
Yeah, the second part I'm going to leave aside for a second. The first part I would say is you always have to remember you have agency, and I'm not going to touch the shame part of it if you're trying to do things differently. There's kind of a lot going on in that question, but for me, and this is on a personal side, let me take a step back. Fantastic question. The issue with burnout is there are a lot of overlapping circles, right? The pandangent life, right? But even before the pandangent, burnout is a collection of your personal life and your work life. But the issue is you're operating outside of what is safe and healthy for you for an extended period of time. And so one of the things that I did when I was trying to first recover, so the very short version of this is, in 2010, I started having health issues, and I didn't take it seriously until 2013. And it took me 2.5 years to recover my health. I had chronic health issues. Eventually, we unraveled some of it and realized it was type 2 diabetes. My biggest concern as we move through and come out of the pandemic is that we might have an explosion of type 2 diabetes, because remember that stress cycle business? When we live in a state of chronic hypervigilance, when we're stuck in that stress cycle and it doesn't fully complete, what happens is your body gets used to sending too much adrenaline into your body. It screws up your pancreas. A lot of stuff gets dysregulated, and it shows up as prediabetes and diabetes, right? So that's the physical aspect of burnout. And so the issue is to understand that there might be an explosion down the line, but diabetes is very much about a habits thing, right? And so for me, one thing that's really important for my health was actually changing my diet. I haven't eaten sugar in like 8 years. That's another lecture. Anyway, I feel like I'm a little bit off topic here, but the first thing is, Olga, if you feel like you know what you need to do, I just want to affirm that you should keep going. The second thing is, when I got sick, nobody had good answers for me. And so I just treated my life like an experiment, truly. And read everything you possibly can to help give you strategies. Atomic Habits is very good. Bad Habits, Good Habits is also very good. The Power of Habit, which is behind me, also very good. And I will give a list of books to Jan and folks so that when they send the post email, and then I'll also post about it on like Twitter, LinkedIn, and so forth. But there are a lot of good books out there on habits. So taking the time to do research, read the books, watch the TED Talks, whatever, and collect information, see what's resonant with you. And then just experiment. See, the crazy thing about this kind of topic too, because it kind of falls in the self-help world, is that all of it is idiosyncratic. All of it is idiosyncratic. Okay. It's all anecdata. It's all anecdotal. That's why there's a whole industry around it, right? Because behavioral change is pretty tricky, because we're kind of conditioned to want immediate results. And truly, when you're trying to change habits, it takes about 10 weeks to establish a new habit semi-automatically. And then it actually takes about 6 months for a habit to become permanent. So most of the time folks want stuff, they want to take a pill or they want something to happen in 2 weeks. And that's just not the case. It's actually about consistent small interventions, right? So that's why I suggest the active rest with colleagues, right? And even if it's something else that you're doing, burnout takes a long time to develop and it takes a long time to recover from. And so the more that you're able to do things in easy, small increments, you're going to find yourself probably more successful. So don't, and we talked about this a little bit during New Year's Eve. Two people put these resolutions out. If you want to create change, think about it in chunks of 5 and 10 and 15 minutes, and think about trying to do one thing, one easy thing that takes 5 to 10 minutes every day so that it becomes habitual. When it becomes habitual, you don't have to cognitively think about it to do it. And that lightens your cognitive load. I feel like I'm getting down into some goofy specifics here. But thank you for all of the questions. And we'll try to figure out a way to get to all of them. And I'm just kind of scanning here. Let's see. Crystal asked, building community. I'm not an expert, but I instituted a 30-minute water cooler chat with my team once a week, and it was great for the team. No work allowed and still connected them. Crystal, yes, you get it. Exactly. And the more that we can do that, whether it's a physical water cooler or it's online, as long as everybody's doing it together at the same time, then that's still a synchronous event that's going to create those great mirror neurons and do all that good stuff together. I love it, Crystal. I love it.
I have a group of 3 here that I captured from the chat.
Yeah.
Manufacturing repetitive process.
Yes.
Not hovering for creativity. What suggestions do you have to spark creativity?
Great question. Thank you for reminding me of that, Brett. I don't know a whole lot about the manufacturing industry, so I don't feel like I can give a really vetted answer here. Creativity is important, but sometimes you have to find the creative bits around the process, right? So you can't, it sounds like in manufacturing, there's a very specific process to getting things done, right? But finding ways to recognize people for doing processes well, the finding ways of recognition is a creative process, right? And finding ways to learn more about your colleagues or your direct reports, to know what forms of recognition are useful for them, right? And motivating for them. I feel like I feel wobbly in answering this because I don't know a whole lot about the manufacturing industry. But I feel like if you want to introduce some creativity, it could be around the edges of the traditional work processes. And that can help alleviate as well. Yes. Well, oh, you're muted, Britt.
How do you facilitate autonomy when employees have struggled to provide quality work?
I think I like always trying to be as curious as possible to the situation at hand, right? So the first kind of wave, and maybe you're already doing this, the person asked this question, but the first is to be curious. What is potentially driving them to not finish quality work, right? And to ask more of them, but also do a little bit more data collection. What are they not getting that they need? Are the directions we're giving them not clear enough, right? Or do they not have enough time? And so autonomy does not mean like, I'm going to give you more time to do whatever. You're not completing the task properly. adding more time might not help increase quality of work, but suggesting to them, hey, like you as the manager suggesting to them, hey, I know we do the process A, B, C, but we're going to do a challenge for the next week. What if we do the process C, B, A, right? Or B, C, A. So you're helping them remix how they're getting the work done to see if that changes the work quality, right? Sometimes the manager's taking a little initiative and saying, you know, we usually do the process this way, but we're gonna do it this different way and see what happens. That just mixing it up cognitively is helpful, but that might also still allow you to have control over a process, right? But you're helping them kind of see it through a different lens.
Okay, here's another.
Mhm.
Plus one on Sarah's question. How is building community different when we're working remotely?
Oh man, yeah. How is it different? How is it different? We can't see each other. Our ability to create mirror neurons is diminished. There is something, I will just say this is, I mean, it's different when we're in person, right? It is different. We're picking up on all sorts of stuff. There's all this emotional nuance and body language and everything else. And also, there is a true thing about the psychology of place, right? We're not meant to live in captivity like most of us have been, or to be in workplaces if we're not in captivity, but we have to be out into the public. That's like extreme danger, right? Unmitigated danger all the time. When we're working remotely, it's really tricky. I'm not going to lie. This is not, I'm making up this number, but I really feel like doing stuff online is like a 75 to 80% solution. You know what I mean? It's not 100% as if we were in person. And there are things that we can do online with videos that are somewhat helpful, but you know, not everybody's good at being on camera. And so one thing I've noticed is I spend a lot more time now talking on the phone to people. I feel like when you're connecting with people by voice and no video, it's a different type of engagement. The voice communicates enormous amounts of emotional nuance that we can pick up on. The visual aspect is good, and there are things we can do like those, you know, active rest or finding ways to engage that can be helpful. But it's not going to be the same, I'll be honest. The couple of, sorry, just because I'm trying to think, I want to give Sarah some
Sure.
tactics here. You know, the first thing, like other people have mentioned, you can create like a virtual water cooler. And I think too, like to make it not difficult, there's no, you know, make it short, first of all. The other reason why I suggest those easy logic games or word games is that people can show up and they don't have to like share of themselves, right? So not everybody likes to talk about their personal life, right? It can be difficult, but they do like a little bit of a distraction, or they are willing to show up and be in community with others and solve a problem together, right? But so that's why I suggest starting with some of those word problems or like a crossword or something, or if you're part of the Wordle craze, like I sure am, like solving that together can be a really great way to connect and create community. And then also just, I've been, this sounds so cheesy. I've been sending a lot of mail to folks. Physical mail has been useful, but I think we really can create community wherever we are. So I think also focusing on ways where you can meaningfully celebrate victories together, or to recognize one another, or to share pictures of pets or children or gardens or whatever interests, that stuff is all really important for meaningful employee engagement. I'm also writing an article right now. There's a study I found, this is hilarious, Brett. I found this study, and it turns out, and all the managers on the line, this could be very useful to you. If you allow your staff to express anger at a work product, so they're not expressing anger at a person, but they're expressing anger at like a work problem, that actually can be almost the same, if not more effective at team building, believe it or not, than just being positive all the time. So sometimes collective griping, again, we don't want to direct it towards a person, but we want to direct it towards a work problem, right? That can actually be being able to express that in a group and feel safe in expressing that can be another way of creating community, believe it or not. The article I'm writing about this, I'm kind of chuckling because there's always that study that comes up that like swearing actually increases, if this is a part of your culture that's allowed, swearing on teams can actually help build really strong bonds of trust. So, you know, maybe finding ways, if it is aligned with the culture of your organization, to, express anger together, or possibly swear if that is allowed, that these are another way of actually creating community.
What are some strategies to deal with guilt surrounding burnout?
Oh, guilt, emotional. Yeah. Great question. Also, Laura, the citation. Yeah, I don't like self-promotion, but if you Google Tanya Tarr Forbes, the article's not live yet, but I'm gonna publish that article probably at the beginning of February. I think also if you Google anger team building, you might find your way to that study too. It's pretty widely cited, and I'm just blanking on it right now on the authors. Guilt is a big deal. Guilt and anger, right? Like guilt. Daniel Pink is publishing a book. It's releasing, I don't remember if it's grief or guilt, but it's that collection of emotions. And his new book might be helpful. But I think, again, I know it sounds really basic, but finding somebody that you trust, that helps create a safe space for you and being able to talk it through, it really has enormous effect in processing that emotion. Because the thing about emotions is you have to process them, right? You can try to stuff them down or ignore them, but the real thing you got to do is process that stuff. You got to talk it through. If you don't feel like you can talk to somebody about what's going on, one thing I've also done for myself and also with clients is talk to yourself, take a voice memo and talk about the things that you're feeling, the guilt that you're feeling, why, and then play it back and listen to yourself. When you do voice recordings, it will surface different information than when you are writing it down in a journal. Not everybody can journal either. And so sometimes recording stuff can be another way of starting to process out that stuff. Listen,
earlier in the webinar, you mentioned a book about burnout. Can you please give us the title and author again?
Yeah, it's Emily Nagoski. I'm going to have to Google it here. I'm actually going to put the TED Talk that she and her sister did in the chat. And I'm sure that'll take you to her book. It's pretty good. There's another one, The Burnout Epidemic. Right, Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle is the name of the book. And then there's also Burnout Epidemic, which just recently came out. Yep. Thank you, Cassie. Appreciate you.
Also, to those of you who are asking about a recording, there will be a recording available. It's going to take us a few days to process that, but we'll get it all out to you through email.
Yeah.
One more question I have before we move on to the other questions that are coming up.
Yeah.
I wonder what the impacts of large-scale burnout and the increase in rage incidents in air travel. I'd be curious about this increase and the fact that it happened during COVID, but it was specifically a result. But was it specifically a result of COVID or possible changes in air travel rules and other individual mental health issues in terms of building community? I'm not an expert, but I did a 30-minute water cooler chat with my team. We had that. Okay, sorry about that.
No, that's all right. So air travel and rage, I think that's a really astute observation. I'm not an expert on behaviors in that situation, but I feel like that your observation seems pretty astute. I feel like a lot of us are not everyone has tools to manage crisis or manage conditions of chronic stress. So I think a lot of people will react in strange and sometimes violent ways. And I'm sorry that I can't give a better pithy answer to that. I'm going to have to think about that question. I think that's a good question. I think a couple of things. We're going to be here until 1:15. And again, thank you all for your questions. We'll try to get back and respond to as many as possible. And I'd love to connect with y'all on LinkedIn or Twitter, Instagram, or wherever, and keep this conversation going. So like kind of high level things besides some of the tactics I threw out here. Well, first of all, and also if you haven't, I got to do one last plug because this is for the research, but if you do have time to take the post survey, that'd be so helpful. for me, but to remember that one of the easiest and greatest mitigation strategies for burnout is conversation with people and to talk through what they're going through, what you're going through. The other thing is that rage and ramifications from chronic stress, Melissa, absolutely. The driving incidents, accidents are up and everything else. That we want to keep in mind that we are living truly in unprecedented times, that if we are able to maintain curiosity over survival in terms of our mindset, that we will do better at adapting in ways that will increase our survival. It's a little bit chicken and egg. You can't be curious and be in survival mode, but we need to be curious in order to survive. The other thing that I would suggest too is to try to find easy, short ways to break up how we do things as a form of mitigation. And that just to try to stay curious, not furious. Sometimes you got to be furious to be able to have the space to be curious, but try to stay curious, not furious. For my own personal journey, I would say that part of how I got well again against great odds. And one of my doctors was like, I've never treated somebody who was so aggressive about her own health before. And I was just like, I have things I got to do. I cannot be sick and not know why and try to fix it. Right. Like, to tap into your inner stubbornness if you can, and look for good answers, and keep looking. The other thing too is, I keep saying this. We are entering into a situation in a lot of different fields, but particularly when it comes to burnout, I think, and I teach a class about this too, which is that we have to understand that evidence is important, data is important, but we have to collect lots of different types of data, empirical, observable, and subjective, and pay attention to the direction the data is going in. This is a very integrative thing we're trying to solve. Burnout is a physical issue, a mental issue, an emotional issue, and a cultural issue. The Burnout Epidemic is a good book, but she talks about it mostly as if burnout is a mental health issue. And it's actually, I think, way more integrative than that. And so we're all going to have different entry points to understand it. And we're going to have to be really creative and very open to all the different solutions that we might come across, and to just keep iterating. But stay curious, not furious, y'all. That is my best piece of advice, life advice.
We've got a really good question here. How can
Yeah.
a staff person usher in cohesiveness with a team when the supervisor is toxic towards some of those staff members?
Oh boy, Melissa, you are asking the tough questions. Well, oh yeah, I hesitate to give an answer because I feel like I got to sit and think about this, and there's probably other stuff going on here in this question. There's a lot going on in that question. How can staff, it just scooted again. Hold on. When the supervisor is toxic towards some of the staff. Okay, so one thing you can do as a staff person, if you are seeing a supervisor be toxic to one of your colleagues, is if it happens in front of you, tone is everything. You will know best because you are in that culture, you're in that situation. But finding ways to say in as neutral a way as possible, like, it's not okay that you just said that to this person, to not allow for the normalization of toxic behavior. You are going to be sticking your neck out when you do this, but yeah. Oh man, I'm sorry, Melissa. I'm not giving you a real elegant answer here. I got to think about this one. That is a great question. I think also what I have all these follow-up questions, like what kind of toxic and how are they? I think one thing though, maybe is where it's not challenging, but you're affirming the staff that is the receiver of the toxic behavior, for you as their colleague to praise that staff's work output, if you can, publicly to the team and to the supervisor. Doing things like that. Wow, that is, Melissa, that I'm going to be thinking about that question I might have to actually write an article about it, but thank you for your question. And I feel like there's a lot more context I wish we had time to chat about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, the last question is HEB has a great culture. What is the name of another
Yeah.
company with a great culture?
The Gore Corporation. And also, I don't know that their culture is awesome. They're so huge, but Google did a long-term project on understanding culture. Y'all, I'm blanking on the name. I'm gonna have to put it in the follow-up notes, but Dr. Amy Edmondson is an academic and an expert that I follow very avidly. She coined the phrase psychological safety. Amy Edmondson, TED Talk, look her up. She talks about aspects of psychological safety, which I think are really helpful. Increasing psychological safety is also a way of fantastic burnout mitigation technique. And then who else? So many. I think we did pretty good, huh, Brett?
We did. I want to thank everybody so much for coming and for your interest. This was a fantastic session. We will be getting a recording slide deck, hopefully some captions on the recording to you as soon as possible. In the interim, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or to Tanya directly. Thank you so much.
Take care, y'all.
Bye-bye.